This is Equatorial Guinea, formerly a Spanish colony and now a small and extremely corrupt country that is split in two parts geographically. Fewer than 2 million people call this their home, and 75% of them live below the poverty line. And that is despite the fact the country's GDP is the 4th highest in all of Africa. I'll get into how that can be possible in a bit, but what's interesting is how the people of this country are separated geographically somewhat based on their income and importance. See, on the mainland, the vast majority of the population reside, and most of these people are poor. On the island, however, you'll primarily find the ruling elite, top officials, and many expatriates. The island is the political and administrative hub of the country, as the capital Malabo is located here. Oh, and a bunch of palaces of the ruling family as well. I can't think of another country with such a stark divide between rich and poor, where they're literally separated onto two different landmasses. But of course, it makes sense. Keep the population you've impoverished as far away as possible, and you minimize the chances of a successful revolt. Which leads us to the most important person to reside on this island, that is of course the supreme ruler of the country, Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, who's been the de facto ruler since 1979 when he captured it in a coup, overthrowing his own uncle, making him the longest serving president on earth. Now that's pretty impressive, but what's more impressive is how deeply corrupt he is. So corrupt, his nation now rivals that of North Korea. He really is one of the maddest dictators I've ever researched. I mean, in 2003, State Radio once said he was, quote, in permanent contact with the Almighty, and could, quote, decide to kill without going to hell. And no, it wasn't satire. It was broadcast to the entire nation and repeated in reports that tracked the regime's propaganda. He really does believe these statements. Interestingly, he does allow elections, and in November 2022, Obiang's party said he won about 95 to 97% of the vote while taking every seat in parliament. The United States, however, said it had, quote, serious doubts about the credibility of those results. Me too. But while the US has always been very well aware of the corruption of this country, they've turned a blind eye to much of it for the most part due to a discovery that was made here in the 1990s. I don't know if you could guess what that discovery was, but it's a resource the US has always been very interested in. It's oil. And oil is the explanation behind the unusually high GDP of this country, even with that many people living in poverty. Now, if you became the ruler of a country and you suddenly struck black gold, would you prefer to build schools, clinics, make clean water accessible, build roads, and, make it a better country overall for everyone to thrive in? Or would you reroute the money to the people who will keep you in power instead? Well, it's a tough situation because either you give the money to those who help you stay in power, or you get your head chopped off for another person to take your place. It's a difficult choice to make, so Obiang chose to stay in power, and that means all of this oil money went somewhere else, and if we follow that money, we'll end up in Washington, D.C., at a now defunct bank called Riggs. See, in 2004, a US Senate investigation found hundreds of millions from Equatorial Guinea in Riggs accounts that Obiang and relatives could access. That money came from US companies like ExxonMobil and Marathon Oil, who had signed production contracts with the government. These companies owed the state royalties, profit shares, and taxes, but instead of those revenues being handled through a transparent treasury system, they were directed into these bank accounts abroad. Now, to be fair, they have spent money on some grand projects in the country. Sure, they may have significantly overpaid so they could funnel some money to the right people and the projects were left abandoned once completed, but hey, at least it's something. One of my favorite projects they've built is the new inland capital, Chipoloro, also called Ciudad de la Paz, or the City of Peace, near the president's home region. In 2016, it swallowed about half the national budget, but then oil prices fell and work slowed. Today, part of it sits half used: a palace, parliament buildings, vast roads, and a ghost city. Another project that doesn't make any sense is an international airport also located in the president's home area. Government and industry sources put the project cost around 375 million, with later terminal extensions nearing 112 million. The airport does work, that's not the problem here. I mean, the runway can take a jumbo jet. The problem lies in the fact it isn't really used, as there can be months between flights, and staff here is just twiddling their thumbs. There's also a luxury conference resort built for an African Union summit, complete with 52 villas for each head of state, but despite the amenities, the resort sees very little activity. Then we of course have the extravagant monuments. In Mongomo, for example, you'll find the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception, one of the largest churches in Central Africa, that was finished in 2011 with state funds, of course. It was modeled after St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican and can hold 1,000 people, which is a lot considering the town it's located in only has a population of around 10,000, meaning this church pretty much never gets filled up. But you get the point. Shiny projects are everywhere when most of the population is still living in poverty. The thing is though, not only has the state failed the people with the most basic amenities, it has also failed at the most basic duty, keeping them safe. See, in 2021, a fire reached a military munitions depot in Bata and set off massive explosions. The blasts killed more than 100 people and injured hundreds more, destroying whole neighborhoods. They somehow didn't think to store explosives away from the population. I guess when you've shown so little interest in the lives of the poorest of your nation, it shouldn't really come as a surprise, but it's sickening. But while Obiang has shown immense neglect to the population, his own son is not scared of showing the wealth he possesses. One of my favorite Instagram pages is the one of his sons. It's filled with luxury cars, mansions, super yachts, and his jet-set lifestyle. Now what's interesting is that his son's official yearly salary working for the government is $100,000, so one doesn't have to think long to figure out his lifestyle is funded by the state. Obviously that hasn't led to any repercussions in his own country, but in 2017, a French court convicted Teodoro Nguema Obiang Mangue of laundering and embezzling public funds. He got a suspended sentence and a 30 million euro suspended fine, and France seized his assets, including a 101-room mansion on Avenue Foch in Paris, and in the States, the US Justice Department reached a 2014 settlement with Teodorin, his nickname, over assets bought with proceeds of corruption. He agreed to give up more than $30 million in US assets, including a Malibu estate. But it gets crazier. In 2019, Swiss prosecutors sold 25 of Teodorin's seized supercars at auction for tens of millions. And in 2018, Brazilian police found $1.4 million in cash and $15 million in luxury watches in bags tied to a Teodorin visit. And in 2025, Brazilian authorities filed money laundering charges linked to a real estate purchase. It's wild how other nations are cracking down on this insanely obvious corruption while he is untouchable in his own land. What's really funny is that Teodorin is actually the head of the anti-corruption body in Equatorial Guinea. The irony is insane. But the days of lavish spending might soon come to an end. See, unfortunately for Teodorin and his father, the oil that made all of this possible is fading. Fields are aging, and in early 2024, ExxonMobil officially pulled out of Equatorial Guinea after nearly 3 decades, selling off its assets and wrapping up operations by mid-year. This came after years of declining output, with the country's crude production halving from around 140,000 barrels per day 5 years prior to just 70,000 by late 2024. Others are cautious as well. See, when these big firms walk away, the easy money slows, and since they haven't managed to diversify their economy, the country will return to what it was before oil. Not that this will affect the majority of the population who have seen no benefit from this oil boom anyway, but it will drastically reduce the spending budget of the ruling family. While the budget might decrease, the firm grip Obiang has on this country will likely stay, because of fear. If you even think about questioning his rule, Obiang has a perfect place for you. Black Beach Prison, one of the most brutal places on the planet. This is where journalists, political opponents, activists, and anyone who doesn't follow the agenda will end up. The guards are infamous for systemic torture. Starvation is a tool they use to break people, and medical care just doesn't exist. In fact, many inmates are left to die from treatable diseases in overcrowded cells. So it's not easy fighting this regime, and if you can't fight the regime from inside the country, you might be asking, why not just do it from outside the country? You'd think if you managed to escape Equatorial Guinea, you'd be safe, right? Wrong. They've become notorious for a particularly nasty tactic, kidnapping their enemies abroad. And there's one instance that happened in 2010 where 4 opposition members who had fled to Benin were suddenly kidnapped by Equatorial agents. They were flown back to Malabo, put on trial in a military court, and executed by firing squad that very same day. Amnesty International later reported they had been tortured into confessing before being killed. Dissidents abroad know they can be lured into fake meetings, bundled into cars, or even handed over by neighboring governments willing to take a bribe. So even outside the country, people live with the fear that Malabo security men could show up. But let's go back to the finances, because this is really interesting. Now that oil revenues are slowly drying up, Obiang and his son needed a new cash lifeline, and they found that in China. Over the past 2 decades, Beijing has become Equatorial Guinea's key economic partner. By 2020, China was buying more than $1 billion worth of Equatorial goods, mostly oil. Chinese state-owned giants like CNOOC and CNPC locked in exploration and drilling rights back in 2006, sharing production with the National Oil Company, and the partnership didn't stop at oil. China also poured in loans. In 2006, the China Exim Bank handed Obiang a $2 billion oil-backed credit line. Then in 2015, the state-run ICBC added another $2 billion for infrastructure, plus a $500 million credit line. That money went into things like the Bata port expansion, the Jiboho hydropower plant, new roads, and housing. Almost all of it built by the Chinese companies. But there's a catch. These projects don't benefit Equatorians very much. Most materials and workers come straight from China, and reports say only 5 to 15% of the workforce is local, despite laws requiring more. And the locals who do get hired are often paid less and work longer hours. All of this has left the country deeply tied to Chinese credit. By 2021, debt to China reached almost half of Equatorial Guinea's GDP, though Beijing has written some of it off, as they expect it to do, because this is one of China's strategies to give money to these states and then build infrastructure, and then they take ownership of that infrastructure later. But that's a whole nother video. But anyway, as Western companies like ExxonMobil pack up and leave, China is stepping in even deeper, offering loans and investments with no questions asked about corruption or human rights. By mid-2024, total Chinese loans to Equatorial Guinea had climbed to about $3 billion. In other words, when the oil cash started fading, China became the new safety net, keeping the Obiang regime afloat. China really has been an invaluable partner, and unlike the US and Europe, which have criticized Obiang's 45-plus-year rule for corruption and human rights abuses, China offers unconditional backing, which includes public endorsements. In 2024, President Xi Jinping and Obiang elevated ties to a comprehensive strategic partnership, emphasizing non-interference in international affairs. Obiang has praised China as his best friend and main developmental partner, while Beijing thanks Equatorial Guinea for supporting issues like Hong Kong's security law, Taiwan, and Xinjiang. This aligns with China's Forum on China-Africa Cooperation and Belt and Road Initiative, fostering uni-multilateral ties since 2000. Concerns have arisen over China's potential military footprint though, as reports since 2021 suggest Beijing seeks a naval base in Bata, which would be its first in the Atlantic Ocean, alarming the US due to proximity to American shores and threats to trade routes in the Gulf of Guinea. While not confirmed as of 2025, China has provided military training and specialists since the mid-2000s, securing influence in the oil-rich region. Bata's location in the Gulf of Guinea, a key oil hub, enhances China's ability to protect sea lanes for tankers. So yeah, China's influence will only grow stronger as Equatorial Guinea looks to stay afloat, and I guess only the future will tell if the citizens will ever get what has always been theirs, their country. But that's it for this video, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.